Welcome back, and thanks for tuning into our channel. State your country are you watching from and comment and subscribe. Let's dive in. It wasn't unusual for her to be held up at work. As a rising star in her marketing firm, she often pulled long hours, burning the midnight oil to meet deadlines and impress clients. I'd always been supportive, understanding the demands of her career and proud of her ambition. I'd even secretly enjoyed the quiet evenings alone, a chance to read, tinker with my woodworking projects, or simply bask in the comfortable silence of our home. But lately, something had shifted. The late nights had become more frequent, her explanations more vague. The spark in her eyes, the one that always seemed to reflect the joy of coming home to me, had dimmed, replaced by a weary, almost distant glaze. I tried to rationalize it. Stress, I told myself. The pressure of her job was undoubtedly taking its toll. I cooked her favorite meals, ran her bubble baths, and offered massages to ease the tension in her shoulders. But my efforts felt like throwing pebbles against a dam, unable to breach the growing distance between us. Then came the work trip to Chicago. A week-long conference, a crucial opportunity for Sarah to network and solidify her position within the company. I'd encouraged her to go, of course. It was important for her career, and I trusted her implicitly. The problem was, she'd come back, different. The weariness was still there, but now it was laced with a strange, unsettling energy. She was jumpy, easily irritated, and strangely evasive when I asked about the conference. She'd brush off my questions with a curt, "It was fine, just really intense," and then quickly change the subject. I tried to ignore the nagging unease that was creeping into my mind. I told myself I was being paranoid, insecure. Sarah was my wife, my best friend, the woman I had vowed to spend the rest of my life with. She wouldn't, could she? The storm outside intensified, the wind howling like a mournful spirit. The headlights of a car finally swept across the window, and I braced myself as Sarah walked through the door, her face etched with fatigue. "Hey," I said, trying to sound casual, "rough day." She shrugged, avoiding my gaze as she tossed her bag onto the kitchen counter. "You have no idea." That was the opening. The tiny crack in the dam I'd been trying so hard to ignore. "Tell me about it," I urged, my voice soft. "I'm here for you." She hesitated, chewing on her lip, then finally met my eyes. I need to tell you something." My heart hammered against my ribs. I knew, somehow, that whatever she was about to say would shatter the carefully constructed reality I had been clinging to. "What is it?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. She took a deep breath. "While I was in Chicago, I met someone." The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. I stared at her, unable to process what I was hearing. "Met someone?" I repeated, my voice flat. "What do you mean, you met someone?" "His name is Mark," she said, her voice trembling. He's also in marketing. We connected at the conference. And we had an affair." The world tilted on its axis. The kitchen, the rain, Sarah herself, seemed to blur and distort. I felt a surge of nausea, a burning sensation in my throat. "An affair?" I managed to choke out. You cheated on me." Tears welled up in her eyes. "I know," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm so sorry. It just happened. I didn't mean for it to." "Didn't mean for it to?" I repeated, the words laced with disbelief and anger. "Sarah, you slept with another man. How can you say you didn't mean for it to happen?" "I was lonely," she cried, her voice rising. "I felt like we weren't connecting anymore. You were always so busy with your woodworking, and I felt like you weren't paying attention to me." "That's bullshit." I exploded, finally losing my composure. "I was supporting you. I was trying to give you space to focus on your career. And you reward me by sleeping with some guy you met at a conference." The argument escalated quickly. Accusations flew like poison darts, each one hitting its mark with brutal accuracy. I accused her of being selfish, of betraying our vows, of throwing away everything we had built together. She accused me of being emotionally unavailable, of neglecting her needs, of failing to appreciate her sacrifices. The rain outside continued to rage, mirroring the tempest within our home. The air crackled with anger, resentment, and pain. In the midst of the storm, I did something I would forever regret. I reached out and grabbed her arm, my fingers digging into her skin. "How could you do this to me, Sarah?" I demanded, my voice raw with anguish. "How could you?" I didn't squeeze hard, I didn't try to hurt her. It was a desperate, instinctive grab, a plea for her to understand the depth of my pain. But in that moment, everything changed. Sarah recoiled, her eyes wide with fear. "Get away from me," she screamed, pulling her arm free. "Don't touch me." "I didn't mean to hurt you," I said, my voice pleading. "You're hurting me right now," she shouted, backing away from me. "You're always hurting me." And then, the words that would forever haunt me, "You assaulted me." The air seemed to thicken, making it hard to breathe. I stared at her, my mind reeling. "What?" I stammered. "What are you talking about? I didn't assault you." "Yes, you did," she insisted, her voice shrill. "You grabbed me, you hurt me. That's assault." I tried to explain, to reason with her, but she wouldn't listen. She was adamant, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and anger. "I'm calling the police," she said, grabbing her phone. Panic surged through me. This couldn't be happening. This was a nightmare. "Sarah, please," I begged. "Don't do this. It's a misunderstanding. I would never hurt you." But she was already dialing. The next few hours were a blur. The arrival of the police, the interrogation, the handcuffs, the ride to the station. I felt like I was trapped in a Kafkaesque nightmare, accused of a crime I hadn't committed. I tried to explain my side of the story, to tell the police about the affair, about the argument, about the accidental grab. But they seemed skeptical, their faces etched with suspicion. "We have to take this seriously, sir," one of the officers said. "Domestic assault is a serious crime." I was booked, fingerprinted, and thrown into a holding cell. The cold, sterile environment amplified the despair that was already consuming me. I was alone, accused of a crime I didn't commit, and betrayed by the woman I loved. The world I knew had shattered. My marriage was in ruins, my reputation tarnished, and my freedom threatened. And it all started with a work trip to Chicago. The days that followed were a living hell. I was released on bail, but the conditions were strict. I couldn't contact Sarah, I had to stay away from our home, and I had to attend mandatory anger management classes. My friends and family were supportive, but I could see the doubt in their eyes. They wanted to believe me, but the accusation of assault hung heavy in the air, poisoning their perception of me. My lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Ms. Davis, was my only lifeline. She believed my story, but she warned me that the case would be difficult. "It's your word against hers," she said. And in domestic violence cases, the woman is usually given the benefit of the doubt. We started building a defense, gathering evidence to support my claim that the grab was accidental and that Sarah's accusation was motivated by anger and guilt over the affair. We interviewed friends, neighbors, and colleagues, trying to paint a picture of a loving, supportive husband, not a violent abuser. But the cloud of suspicion lingered. I lost my job, my friends distanced themselves, and I became a pariah in my own community. The shame and humiliation were almost unbearable. The anger management classes were a joke. I sat in a room with genuine abusers, men who had a history of violence and a complete lack of remorse. I felt like an imposter, a wrongly accused man forced to listen to lectures about controlling my anger. Meanwhile, Sarah had moved back into our home. I saw her once, from a distance, as she was leaving for work. She looked pale and drawn, but her eyes were filled with a cold, steely resolve. The thought that she could deliberately lie and accuse me of such a heinous act was incomprehensible. How could the woman I loved, the woman I had shared my life with, be capable of such cruelty? The trial date loomed, hanging over me like a sword of Damocles. Ms. Davis warned me that the prosecution had a strong case. They had Sarah's testimony, photographs of the alleged bruises on her arm, which were barely visible, and the testimony of the police officers who had responded to the scene. My life was on the line. If convicted, I could face jail time, a criminal record, and the complete destruction of my reputation. The trial began on a Monday morning. The courtroom was packed, filled with reporters, curious onlookers, and a handful of my supporters. Sarah took the stand first. She was composed and articulate, her voice trembling slightly as she recounted the events of that night. She described me as a controlling, emotionally abusive husband who had finally snapped and turned violent. Her testimony was devastating. She painted a picture of me as a monster, a man capable of inflicting pain and suffering on the woman he claimed to love. Ms. Davis cross-examined her, gently but firmly challenging her account of events. She questioned her about the affair, about her motives for making the accusation, and about the inconsistencies in her story. But Sarah remained steadfast, her eyes fixed on the jury, her voice filled with conviction. I watched her, my heart aching with a mixture of anger, sadness, and disbelief. Was this the same woman I had married? The woman I had vowed to love and cherish? When it was my turn to testify, I was a wreck. My voice shook, my hands trembled, and my mind was a jumble of conflicting emotions. I told the truth, as best I could. I described the affair, the argument, and the accidental grab. I insisted that I had never intended to hurt Sarah and that her accusation was a lie. The prosecution cross-examined me relentlessly, trying to poke holes in my story and paint me as a liar. They grilled me about my anger management classes, about my unemployment, and about my strained relationship with my family. I felt like I was drowning, trapped in a sea of accusations and doubt. The trial dragged on for days. Witnesses were called, evidence was presented, and arguments were made. The jury listened intently, their faces inscrutable. I spent my nights tossing and turning, replaying the events of that night over and over in my mind. I wondered if I could have done anything differently, if I could have prevented this catastrophe. On the final day of the trial, the jury retired to deliberate. The hours that followed were the longest of my life. I sat in the courtroom, my stomach churning with anxiety, waiting for the verdict. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the jury returned. The courtroom fell silent as the foreman stood and read the verdict. We, the jury, find the defendant not guilty. A wave of relief washed over me, so powerful that I almost collapsed. I had been acquitted. I was free. But the victory felt hollow. My marriage was over, my reputation tarnished, and my life forever changed. As I walked out of the courtroom, a free man, I knew that the road ahead would be long and difficult. I had to rebuild my life, piece by piece, and try to find a way to move on from the devastation that Sarah had wrought. The immediate aftermath of the trial was a blur of media attention and well-meaning but ultimately unhelpful advice. My face was plastered across newspapers and television screens, the story of my ordeal dissected and analyzed by pundits and armchair experts. Some people saw me as a victim, a wrongly accused man who had been through hell. Others still harbored doubts, whispering about, where there's smoke, there's fire. I retreated to a small, sparsely furnished apartment on the outskirts of town, a far cry from the comfortable suburban home I had shared with Sarah. The silence was deafening, broken only by the occasional siren or the distant rumble of traffic. I spent my days in a state of numb detachment, unable to focus, unable to find joy in the things that had once brought me pleasure. Ms. Davis, ever the pragmatist, urged me to file a defamation suit against Sarah. She made false accusations that damaged your reputation and caused you significant financial and emotional harm, she argued. You have a strong case. But I hesitated. The thought of dragging Sarah through another public ordeal, of prolonging the pain and bitterness, filled me with a sense of weariness. Part of me still clung to the memory of the woman I had loved, the woman who, despite everything, I couldn't quite bring myself to hate. Instead, I focused on trying to rebuild my life, a task that seemed daunting, almost impossible. I started attending therapy, hoping to unravel the tangled mess of emotions that plagued me. My therapist, a kind, empathetic woman named Dr. Evans, helped me to understand the trauma I had experienced and to develop coping mechanisms for dealing with the anger, resentment, and grief that threatened to consume me. She also encouraged me to reconnect with my passion for woodworking, a craft that had always brought me a sense of peace and purpose. I started small, building simple pieces of furniture for my apartment, gradually regaining my confidence and rediscovering the joy of creating something beautiful with my hands. Slowly, painstakingly, I began to emerge from the darkness. I found a new job, working as a carpenter for a small construction company. The work was physically demanding, but it was also deeply satisfying. I enjoyed the camaraderie of my coworkers, the sense of accomplishment that came from building something tangible, and the opportunity to forget, for a few hours each day, the pain of the past. I also started volunteering at a local animal shelter, walking dogs and cleaning cages. The unconditional love and affection of the animals provided a much-needed balm for my wounded soul. As I began to heal, I realized that I couldn't let Sarah's actions define me. I had to find a way to forgive her, not for her sake, but for my own. Holding on to hatred and resentment would only poison my own life, preventing me from moving forward. Forgiveness, however, was not the same as forgetting. I knew that I could never fully trust Sarah again, that the scars of her betrayal would always remain. But I could choose to release the anger and bitterness, to let go of the need for revenge, and to focus on building a better future for myself. One evening, about a year after the trial, I received an unexpected phone call. It was Sarah. My heart skipped a beat as I heard her voice, hesitant and fragile, on the other end of the line. "Hi," she said softly. "It's Sarah." "I know," I replied, my voice carefully neutral. There was a long silence, broken only by the sound of her breathing. I wanted to apologize," she said finally. "For everything. For the affair, for the accusation, for everything I put you through." I didn't say anything, waiting for her to continue. "I know that what I did was unforgivable," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "But I hope that someday, you can find it in your heart to forgive me. Not because I deserve it, but because you deserve to be free from the anger and bitterness." I still remained silent, processing her words. "I was wrong," she admitted. "I was hurt and angry, and I lashed out at you in the worst possible way. I let my emotions cloud my judgment, and I did something that I will regret for the rest of my life. Why are you telling me this now?" I asked, my voice still guarded. "Because I need to," she replied. "I need to take responsibility for my actions and try to make amends, however small, for the pain I caused you." She paused, then added, "I'm not asking for your forgiveness. I know that I don't deserve it. But I hope that you can believe that I am truly sorry." The silence stretched between us again, longer this time. I thought about all the pain and heartache she had caused me, the years of my life that had been irrevocably altered by her actions. But I also thought about the woman I had loved, the woman who, despite her flaws, had once brought me so much joy. I thought about the importance of forgiveness, not just for her sake, but for my own. "I appreciate you calling, Sarah," I said finally. "I hope you find peace." "Thank you," she whispered. "Goodbye." And then, the line went dead. I sat there for a long time, staring at the phone. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more amazing content. Hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. What do you think about today's story? Let me know in the comments below. Share this video with your friends and family who'd love this.